1906, a full moon, the birth of Creighton Chaney, son of Lon Chaney, who we now know as Lon Chaney Jr., the man of 1,000 faces. Maria Uspenskáya says in The Wolfman, the way you walked was thorny. This was the first of the thorny way of the man who became known as Lon Chaney Jr.
In the pantheon of your horror stars, I have to say Lon Chaney Jr. fits just a bit below the top. He is the guy who gets the crook in the back of his neck from looking up at Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, and his dad, Lon Chaney. In a way, that's one of the reasons why I think we like him more. You know, he doesn't have it easy.
The story is that he was born dead. His father broke the ice in Belle Isle Lake, dunked him in, shocked him into life. One of the many stories that Chaney would tell about his father over the years, sometimes very loving, warm stories, sometimes very, very disturbing stories.
Chaney seemed to have real mixed feelings about his father. He obviously had huge respect for him, and as an actor, he really admired him. But he spent his life in his dad's shadow, which I think there was a certain resentment there.
He grew up thinking that his mother was dead, because when he was a very small boy, there was a split between his father and his mother, Cleva. The shock that he felt later when he found out that she actually was alive and being kept out of his life would be certainly enough to affect a boy in a very negative way and leave a scar.
Apparently, Lon Chaney, the senior, had suffered a lot coming up as an actor before he became a movie star. I mean, decades and decades went by. There was a bad marriage, poverty, and he didn't want that to happen to his own son. And so he was very strict with Creighton about becoming an actor.
You can interpret the fact that he did not want his son to be an actor as an act of love. He didn't want him to have to go through the same traumas that he had to face in his road to fame. Or you can interpret it as an act of jealousy. Lon Chaney Sr. was the man of 1,000 faces. He didn't want an heir to the throne. Certainly, the story appears to be true that when Creighton Chaney voiced his intentions of following in his father's footsteps, his father took him and enrolled him in a technical institute to learn to be a plumber.
I think probably this caused Creighton to feel bad about himself, to feel like he wasn't a man, that he wasn't in control of himself. And then, of course, his father dies at a young age, 47. And Creighton is left in the world with this name and very little else. It's the Depression. His plumbing business fails, the plumbing business that his father forced him to go into. His marriage fails. And the only thing I think that gave him any sense of self-esteem was acting. And so he started at the bottom. He started in bit parts.
I've never heard of Lon when he was starting out taking advantage of being Lon Chaney, because at that time he was Creighton Chaney. I'm not sure that being the son of a famous actor, if it makes it more difficult for you to be successful. But when you are successful and do it on your own, I think the people appreciate it more.
At the Devil's Circle. This is the key. We have a password. The sunrise. El Shaitan!
I think early in his career, you know, Chaney was just one of the crowd. I mean, if you look at something like Undersea Kingdom, where he's like the number 3 bad guy, he's head thug, not mastermind, not, you know, Grand Vizier advisor. He's head thug. He's the guy getting knocked out first in that. And actually, that's a perfectly good career. Yeah, he could have stuck with that for a while. It's interesting that he, maybe because of the pressure of having a famous name, he did strive for more.
And I suspect his agent, as the first thing his agent ever said to him was basically, if you change your name to Lon Chaney Jr., we can get you, starring roles in movies. So I think it was actually much more of a canny move than anything else.
He said later they had to starve me to make me take his name. Didn't do any good. He still didn't get anywhere professionally. He turned to stunt work. He said he did every difficult stunt in pictures. He fell off cliffs. He drove horses into rivers. He rode prairie schooners up and down hills, all of these crazy kinds of things. Again, not progressing anywhere. He signed a contract with 20th Century Fox in 1937. For 2 years, he played nothing but bit roles. The studio only kept him because of the fact he agreed each time his option came up, he wouldn't take any kind of a raise.
Well, what'll I do? Beat it.
And it wasn't so much that Creighton had technique as that he had natural talent. He had that natural passion that was inherited from the Cheneys.
He said one of the things that one of his best acting classes was living with his grandparents, who were both deaf, and they would take him to deaf dances, and it was almost like an acting exercise. He didn't know at the time, but it probably was the reason why he was so good at what he did, because he connected with people.
Of course, he had that great face with those eyes that could just break your heart with that sadness and tragic quality. So I think in ways he was very similar to his father.
He did feel that there was a tradition being carried on. I mean, I think when he did One Me in BC and wanted to do his own makeup, and did do his own makeup, which was pretty effective, and because of union roles that couldn't be used, I think that was part of trying to carry on the family traditions, very specifically. And I don't know that another actor without that background would have so readily submitted to all the makeups.
You figure by 1939, he has lost the contract at 20th Century Fox, and almost all of Hollywood regards him as a mockery of his father, a mockery of the great name of Lon Chaney. He has really hit bottom. And as frequently happens when somebody hits bottom, it's only one way to go, and that's up, and a very, very strange thing happened. The play of Mice and Men, based on the John Steinbeck novel, was going to be produced in Los Angeles. It had been a big hit on Broadway. Wallace Ford had played George. Broderick Crawford had played Lenny. Chaney, with virtually no stage experience, went and auditioned for the part of Lenny, and he nailed it. And the play opened in April of 1939, and all of a sudden, LA audiences were cheering for Lon Chaney Jr. Overnight, he had gone from this misfit to an actor of great power and promise.
Go on, George. Tell about the rabbits in the cages, and the rain in the winter, and the stove, and the cream in the milk so thick you can hardly cut it with a knife. Tell about that, George.
I don't know why you don't do it yourself. You know it all.
Oh, please, it ain't the same if I tell it. Go on, George. Tell about the rabbits and how I get to tend them.
It's interesting because Lon Chaney Sr. couldn't play Lenny, and very few other actors can. I'm not saying that Lon Chaney Jr. wasn't smart, but he wasn't the brightest guy, and that meant that he was closer to Lenny. He could feel Lenny, and there's a sense of the anger and the pain in a limited man.
Chaney Jr. could project a kind of brute strength coupled with a certain bear-like vulnerability and sensitivity, and for that reason he was ideally cast.
Please don't yell. George is going to say I've done a bad thing. Don't do that. You're going to get me in trouble just like George says you will.
And, of course, the fact that he kills the girl and the general sort of hulking quality of the character obviously tipped Universal off to the fact that this could be a guy to follow in his father's footsteps after all.
Let go of him, Lenny! Let go! Let go of his hand, Lenny!
Of Mice and Men was both a blessing and a curse to Chaney's career. I think he basically found the role of a lifetime, which doesn't happen to that many actors. And it's a defining role. It's one of those roles that everybody remembers. The trouble was, that's all they ever wanted out of him ever since he appeared in that movie. From that point on, he was typecast, whether he knew it or not, whether the people working with him knew it or not. And the problem, I think, with Chaney's entire career, basically, is the studios didn't know what to do with him.
Look, Jim, I'll just got baby boy.
Fine papoose.
I've got to tell my wife about this.
Universal resurrected their monsters on a big scale, and they made a big-budget Frankenstein sequel, Son of Frankenstein, that had Karloff and Lugosi. And it was a hit, but what this new Universal decided to do was now relegate their horror movies to B-budget status.
What Universal was looking for was a young, strong, powerhouse horror star who could stand the rigors of the makeup, who could lug around the leading ladies, who could take all the punishment that horror stars were used to. Who did they turn to? They turned to Lon Chaney Jr. Because after all, Lon Chaney Sr. had made immortal cinema history on the Universal lot.
They tried him out in Man-Made Monster, which was a Karloff Lugosi vehicle from the 30s that never got made. And Chaney was great in it. And he brought all the emotion and all the sadness and all the pathos that Lon Chaney was capable of. It was quite a performance.
You did get even with him, didn't you? You feel better. You keep telling yourself you got even.
I killed him.
Man-Made Monster is really a great showcase for Chaney because he really, again, really builds the character. He's very moving and he's very frightening. He's got the great horror combination of scaring you while at the same time making you pity him. And Universal said, perfect, just what we're looking for.
In the 30s, they were the European kind of exotic actors like Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, and George Zucco, and various people who seemed kind of otherworldly to a very traditional American audience. But the 40s and World War II really ushered in the everyman. It was very patriotic. It was about the Americans. And even in the case of 1941 in The Wolfman, Lon Chaney is a guy who is overseas, but he's an American in another world.
A wolf and a star. What does that mean?
I thought you said you were psychic.
Oh, I am. But this is only wood and silver, and it hasn't blue eyes.
There have been many Draculas and many Frankenstein monsters. But the truth is, Lon Chaney Jr. is the only Wolfman. He is the Wolfman.
The Wolfman is Chaney's crowning moment, and he knew that. He's acknowledged that in all the interviews. It was the one film that he could actually say was his own.
Well, what's great about the character of the Wolfman, or more specifically the character of Lawrence Talbot, is he knows what happens to himself. He doesn't remember the experience, but he's anguished about it. He's helpless to commit these violent acts when he becomes a beast and becomes feral and needs that, bloody attack. But when Lawrence Talbot finds out that he's the one behind this, it tears him up. And that's something that Chaney really did well.
We talk about the sadness of monsters, and I think Chaney really did do that. You feel sorry for Chaney. You genuinely care about his plight. He tries to do the right thing, and he still gets cursed, and he has to live with that. And I think he conveys that feeling very well.
If you watch The Wolfman, you see that basically in that film, he explodes like a volcano. All the bitterness about his father, all the frustrations of his career in the 1930s, all of these problems suddenly erupt, boom, explode, and out of the fire leaps the Wolfman. And he seems to be loving it. Even under all that makeup, you can see in his eyes, you can see in his energy, you can see in his body language. It's like, all of my personal demons are out and alive under the full moon and amuck, and I'm loving it.
Certainly, the character of Lawrence Talbot has a big piece of his soul missing, and there's a soulfulness in that performance that really was special in that movie, as well as some of the others.
I bet he really didn't enjoy the whole process of it all, going through the makeup. Nobody in their right mind really would, I'd always kind of heard that he wasn't real fond of Jack Pierce. There's that photo you see of Jack making up Lon. Lon's gonna punch him. I'm sure he didn't like that in the end, but I think he liked the fact that the Wolfman was his, and it made Lon Chaney Jr. known.
Here I still carry the sign of the pentagram, the mark of the werewolf. I kill people. When the moon is full, I turn into a wolf.
It's not in my power to help you.
You're the only one that understands. Nobody else in the world will believe me.
Every time Chaney played the Wolfman, I think he gave it 100%, even though I think he began to wonder, why did they keep bringing me back?
The Larry Talbot character in the Wolfman films does undergo quite interesting development across the course of the films. It's very interesting that in the first film, he's the fresh-faced boy transplanted into Wales, hasn't got a clue what's going on. By the last film, which, after all, was only made 4 years later, House of Dracula, Chaney Jr.'s performance has deepened into quite an affecting kind of, I can't be bothered with all this sort of end-of-the-line kind of despair, I get killed from film after film, yet somehow I keep bouncing back and I've got this bloody lycanthropic curse. What do I do about it? And in that last film, he's cured. at the end of it. So you think, well, there is a happy ending for Larry Talbot. But in the course of getting there, it's a pretty miserable story. And Chaney Jr. does deserve great kudos because it was his character, his baby, as I think he called it, and it was the one character that he played in those horror movies of the 40s really, really well.
Those scenes where he's not wearing the Jack Pierce makeup is not important to the monster rallies that happened in the 40s. And ultimately, 1947 kind of drove the nail in the coffin with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. However, that's probably the best Lawrence Talbot role in any of those Monster Mash movies that came after the original Wolfman.
Larry Talbot's always in the position of, help me, please, or you don't understand, or you have to lock me up. And he's playing it quite sincere, for Lou Costello and Bud Abbott to mock. But if he wasn't straight, then it wouldn't be funny.
Now, come on, get up! Get up! We gotta find Sean. Come on, now take that mask off! I'm your friend!
I think one of the reasons Chaney Jr. rose so quickly is because he had the full might of the studio machine behind him. They wanted him to be a star, and so they applied to him a number of frankly laughable sobriquets like the master character creator. In his horror films, at least, that was one thing Chaney was not. He tended to be Chaney.
I think Chaney really lucked out by being able to be put into such well-produced movies. I mean, he's the only guy who played all the classic monsters. And I think for the most part, well, there's no way that any other actor was going to follow Karloff as the monster. And so when Ghost of Frankenstein was made, which is pretty much of a B picture compared to the previous three, it still is a universal B picture. And Chaney's interpretation of the monster is obviously much slower and more dull-witted than the Karloff version. But I don't think you can really blame it on Chaney that his monster is not as interesting as Karloff's monster. However, the thing that really does work in that picture is the idea that he switches brains with Bela Lugosi, who plays Igor. And the image of Chaney speaking with Lugosi's voice is still pretty chilling.
I, Igor, will live forever!
Some have complained that he was put into Son of Dracula, which many people have said, oh, well, Chaney is miscast. I disagree. There's a physicality to his Dracula that really prefigures the Christopher Lee era, and I think it was way ahead of its time, and I think Chaney's really effective in it.
Chaney plays it with no identifiable accent, but he plays Dracula very quietly, very sinisterly. He has a lot of power, and there are close-ups of him where the camera's at a low angle and Chaney's pale face looks like a bloated leech. He looks like he's just drunk a lot of blood, and he's good for the night.
He portrayed such a large person, and I think that was the thing that everybody said, well, it's kind of scary and everything. Well, yeah, because when he'd walk in, he was this huge monster. He could portray a monster that was going to scare everybody to death, but he didn't have to say a word, and he didn't, just walking in, just his presence was enough.
But a lot of these parts, really, he wasn't suitable for. And the one that he particularly loathed, and you can see why, was Karis, the mummy in the rather low-rent series of mummy sequels that Universal produced. But I think Chaney Jr. brings something to them. Karis is quite a repulsive figure and quite a sort of remorseless and violent and brutal one, which I think was Chaney Jr.'s contribution.
There's a series of low-budget Universal B quickies based on the radio series The Inner Sanctum. And Lon Chaney Jr. is in a bunch of those, playing relatively, husbands, businessmen, whatever, who get into these terrible crimes or mysteries. But he's really good in quite a few of them.
Taken everything in my life away from me.
Wait a minute, Jeff, you've got to let me explain.
Don't, Jeff.
Now you want my wife. I'm going to take something back that belongs to me.
Stay where you are. Stay where you are.
Something I've got to have.
Jeff.
The trouble is, we think of his father as the man of 1,000 faces. The problem with Lon Chaney Jr. is the man of one face. He was the best Lon Chaney Jr. there was in the movies at that time. And I think that's why Chaney Jr. became a star, because he was great at being Lon Chaney Jr. And the problem was, I think, that when Universal put him under the Frankenstein makeup or the Mummy makeup or the Wolfman makeup or even the Dracula makeup, he was still just Lon Chaney under there. And his monsters are very much blunt instruments.
Chaney's heyday coincided with the big horror boom of the 40s that lasted pretty much the duration of World War II. Right after that period, Universal became Universal International Studios. They merged with another company and made a decision to get out of the B-movie business. They stopped making the horror films, and then they didn't renew his contract.
On the night of April 22nd, 1948, about a month after Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein finished shooting, Chaney attempted suicide. And he came very close to dying. He was in a coma for 48 hours. There was fear that he would die. The LA Examiner even sent up his obituary. And it looked very, very bad. And when he recuperated, though, the family spokesman said the reason he did it is because he was exhausted from trying to emulate his father and all the rigorous work of playing the Wolfman, and therefore attempted to take his own life. So it's kind of grim, certainly, to think that Chaney later excused a suicide attempt by blaming it on the Wolfman. That's very sad. And of course, part of this was the fact that he had a very serious problem with alcohol. Charlie Barton, who directed Chaney in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, directed him in 1936 in a picture called Rose Bowl. He said, Lon Jr. was as gentle as a little lamb. He was a wonderful man, but he had a terrible drinking problem. Even at that time, he was only 30 years old. And he said by late afternoon, sometimes Chaney Jr. didn't even really know where he was. He was that lost. He would become that fogged on alcohol.
I'm actually surprised that Jack Pierce could even get makeup to stick on him. You know, I mean, when you drink a lot, you like sweat basically acetone, which is what removes, you know, the spirit gum and stuff that they would use. So I mean, I'm curious how those makeups even stayed on him.
Whatever caused his alcoholism was a monster of his making. And God knows, through all the transformations and everything that the werewolf character had to go through to lay motionless, staring at a target, well, they'd crank off a few feet of film, and then they'd stop, and they'd come in and put a little bit more hair, and then they'd crank off a few feet, and then put a little bit more hair. And those transformations took 20 hours apiece. He said at one point it just became the only way that he could survive that situation is to have a bottle of booze, but, you know, that's something that he chose to do.
He was also apparently a big practical joker, and the front of house at Universal must have hated him for the kind of hijinks gags him and his drinking buddies, particularly Broderick Crawford, would get up to. And they apparently would create chaos around Universal.
Perhaps a good way to show Chaney's personality at this time is that during the war years, he bought a ranch in California, and he named it Lenny's Ranch. In a sense, he was like Lenny. He was almost childlike. He had very strong emotions. He could be very sweet and very kind. At least on 2 occasions, he wanted to adopt children because he, as he put it, he fell in love with them.
When my mom passed away, I know Lon had asked my dad if he was interested in letting us be adopted. And I was 8 and my brother was 2. Of course, my dad said no, but it was a neat feeling because I was very comfortable with Lon and Patsy both. I felt really good. I felt that was nice that he wanted to take us and keep us, you know.
He wanted to be generous. He wanted to be kind. I think he had this idea in his mind that if there had been a happy ending for Lenny and of Mice and Men, and he got the ranch he always dreamed about, this was the life that Lon Chaney would have.
If you talk to any of the kids who worked on his films, they all loved him. He was like Uncle Lon. He had his own kids too, of course, you know. And he loved animals. There was a dog at Universal, a stray. It was a big dog. I mean, really a big dog. He looked like a wolf, really, is what he looked like. He was actually used in The Wolfman as the wolf that Bela Lugosi turns into. That's Moose. Well, Moose became his dog. I mean, Moose followed him around everywhere he went. And there's publicity stills of Lon in the Wolfman makeup with Moose sitting around looking at him. In fact, even in one of the Mummy films, Moose is standing up on his hind legs by Chaney in the Mummy outfit. I mean, he loved animals. And wherever he was, the dog was with him.
I think Chaney's rise and fall was such a brief one because he was the man for his time. With the end of the war, the demand for horror films dropped off dramatically.
Lon was one of the most dependable actors I have ever known. He didn't always appear in big marquee pictures and things, but he was active. I never saw Lon Chaney unprepared. Come in the morning, he knew everything that day he was going to do, and he had all of his lines down. The only thing the director had to say was action.
You have to realize that Chaney was one of the most popular character actors in Hollywood. He worked constantly, and in television, when television came along, he was ubiquitous. He was everywhere.
It was amazing how people would come in for the first time on the picture and said, "Hey, is Lon Chaney in this?" I said, "He's, of course, sure he's in everything." He said, "It's great. I want to meet him." And everybody wanted to.
He did that thing of getting old very quickly, which is a very clever thing to do if you're a star turning into a character actor. It's inconceivable that the guy you see in The Wolfman is 10 years younger than the guy you see in High Noon.
Lon Chaney often played father figures, especially later on in his career. And I think what Lon Chaney does when he plays a father figure is he plays the father that he wishes he had.
Now, before your mama bring you over from the old country, I bought you these wonderful books so that you will not grow up so ignorant as Papa.
Lon Jr. did a TV thing called The Golden Junk Man. And he plays an Italian immigrant who is uneducated, has a junkyard, and he has 2 sons. Neither one are interested at all in that. They want to do their own thing. And so he sends them off to college. He saves up enough money to send them to college. And they're always poo-pooing his junkyard. They don't seem to like it much and all that stuff. And he tries so hard because he wants them to be better than he was. He wants them to be somebody, not just a junk guy he thinks is wrong. And I get the feeling a lot of that came from Chaney's upbringing, because he had problems with his dad like that, who kind of put him away for a while. I was supposed to do a shoot up at the Magic Castle, and I got talking to Lon, and he was totally on the wagon then, totally, and we were talking. And I happened to say, one of my best things I love that you did, it's one of my favorite things, The Golden Junk Man. And I looked at him, and he got this strange expression on his face. I didn't know if I'd done something wrong or what. And all of a sudden, a tear comes down his eye. He's rolling down his cheek. And I thought, uh-oh, I've done something here. And he gets up and he says, "Do you remember that show?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it's wonderful, you know." He comes over and he gave me the biggest bear hug I've ever gotten in my entire life. And he says, "Thank you for telling me that." He says, "My family and I love that, but nobody else has even mentioned that to me." Just for that moment with Lon, I mean, I got to see the man behind the mask.
But Lon could do about anything that you wanted in pictures. Stanley Kramer, one of our biggest producer-directors, used Lon and High Noon and all of his other pictures with some of the biggest stars in the business. And Stanley once said, "Anytime there's a part in one of my pictures that I think is so difficult, I try to think who could do it. Lon's name comes right to me."
It's really sad. I mean, even at his height, he was never a very respected actor. Karloff and Lugosi both worked for years in really horrible movies too, but Chaney's was really depressing because he was capable of it. He lasted a long time after his contract work was up at Universal and took every TV episode thrown at him, every little B movie thrown at him. And it's always sad to see someone cling to a career that no longer offers you gold.
Spider Baby was his last hurrah, really. I mean, it's his targets. And he's very good at it.
It's a last chance to sum up everything he means in the genre. And it's a really good film. I mean, it's a really solid, strange, surprising film. He sings the title song, which I think is one of his finest 5 minutes work.
Can I feed Winifred now?
Winifred? Oh, no, not now. Can't she wait?
If she gets hungry, she'll go looking for something to eat.
Oh, in that case, you go right ahead. But hurry up.
I will.
When he read the script, he saw that this was something very, very different from anything he'd been doing. And one reason he really loved this project and really wanted to do it is because it gave him a chance to do comedy. And nobody ever thought of him to my knowledge, as being somebody who could be good at comedy, and he was great at it. You know, he just gets great laughs in the film, and that's what he really wanted very badly to do.
I can't be here all the time. You know that I have to take Ralph into the city to the doctor once in a while.
We shot the film in 11 days or 12 days, something crazy like that. And the first 2 days, I was almost hiding from him. Not that I was afraid, but I just didn't know what you say to somebody like Lon Chaney Jr. And at one point, Jack said, you know, we're ready. Where's Chaney? Sid, go get him, okay? So I went over and I knocked on his trailer door and I said, Mr. Chaney, they're ready for you. And he said, no, stop that. I'm not Mr. Chaney, okay? I'm Lon, you're Sid, we're working together. Let's just keep it at that, okay? And so it kind of put me at ease and made talking to him and hanging around him a little easier to do.
He just was amazing. Mostly he just exuded this warmth and humanity, which was real towards the cast, and in the sense of the characters in the story, it just worked perfectly.
You know, I know where there's a nice new toy that'll do a wonderful thing.
A toy?
Yes. And you can stay up late just to see it.
Can we?
When he finished that, the crew was in tears. And there was a standing ovation. They wouldn't let him off the set for 5 minutes. Everybody was crying and hugging one another, and it was just this big thing that he created. And it was so cool.
It was just heartbreaking to me, and I'm sure it probably was to Lon, that the film was not released, and that in his lifetime he never knew what a great popular cult film this was going to be. So it's, to me, it's very sad that he didn't live to see that phenomenon.
Lon Sr. knew sign language, and from his father he learned sign language, and at the end of his life he was using sign language because he couldn't talk. Very ironic that he died from the same disease his father did, and both of them ended up having to talk by sign language.
He worked almost up to the very end of his life. He was crazy about acting. He wanted to do it whenever he could, wherever he could. He was still in love with his career right up to the end.
And that's, you know, that's what actors do. They die with their boots on.
Glenn Strange was probably his closest friend that he had, in the movie business anyway. He looked at Glenn as a brother. And Glenn, you know, just always said he's the nicest guy ever. Lon was really ill. I went out with Glenn to see Lon. Patsy, Lon's wife, called and said to Glenn, please come out and see him. He had cancer, he had a throat operation. And she got Glenn kind of aside and said, he's not gonna last much longer. We went home that night and Glenn was just saying, oh boy, I just hate to see Lon in this condition. Now what they didn't know is Glenn had cancer, lung cancer already. Well, a few months later, Lon passed away. And I worked at CBS at the time. And I knew the people in the news department, and they knew that I knew Lon. And they said, can you find somebody to talk about Lon? Because we're going to do a little obit thing on him tonight. But nobody wants to talk about him. Now, Glenn was bedridden by now with lung cancer. And I went over that night, and I was talking to Glenn. I said, Glenn, you know, it's really sad. Nobody will speak for him. He says, oh, somebody has to. He said, I will. And so he got out of bed. I took him down that day. We went in there. And he said the sweetest things about Lon. Nobody else would talk about him. And Glenn, you know, he talked about his demons and stuff, but he said he was really a wonderful actor. And the stuff he said about him was so heartfelt. Here's a guy dying himself, but he comes in for a friend. And then like 6 months later, Glenn was gone too.
It was great that Chaney lived long enough to see that revival, and you know, people of my generation who grew up watching the shock theater package on TV and all the classic Universal horror movies of Red Famous Monsters, you know, idolized these guys, Chaney and Karloff and Lugosi, and he at least lived long enough to see that, and I'm sure that had to make him feel good.
I think what I would say is that he was a gentle giant. And that's all I could really say about him. He's a gentle giant. Very sweet, very loving, and very caring.
He was a child of privilege, and yet he had kind of a rough and tumble young adulthood after his father died. And he was not a man of great education, yet obviously he had wonderful instincts and great observation, great human observation, a talent he probably inherited from his father. And I think they all came together and made his persona in the horror films.
He was a minor star for not very long, which isn't entirely a bad thing. There are people who have been major stars for long periods that nobody's making documentaries about. Chaney is kind of a bigger name than a lot of people who he must have envied.
As he grew into his older self, there were a lot of pieces of his life that he used. And it's funny, for a guy who is so supposedly unhappy, people's memories, when they're asked about him, who worked with him, were generally pretty positive. I mean, a lot of people thought he was, quote, a sweet guy. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons that he is so well thought of today.
And I think one of the things that drove Lon into being such a good actor was he never wanted to do anything that would reflect badly on the name of Lon Chaney Sr. And his name is so prominent that when somebody says Lon Chaney, I've had him say Junior or Senior.
He had this angst. He had this fire. And when the role showcased that angst and fire, as the Wolfman did, then it was unforgettable. And I think that's the real heart and soul of the Wolfman, is this fire blazing away in Lon Chaney Jr.